Tonight we have an interesting conversation as you are author of a wonderful book. You are rising star of geopolitical professionals. And I would like to ask you several questions regarding your view, which made a lot noises in this country. Well, let's start first from your interesting trip you had a few years ago, 2 years trip around 40 countries. Probably it gave you the topics for your book.
That's right.
And please tell us about the book, The Second War.
I was a fellow at the Brookings Institution, one think tank in Washington, D.C., and I was the youngest fellow there, and everyone else had written many books. So I said, it's time for me to write a book. So I received a grant from a publisher, and I traveled for 2.5 years, actually, to about 45 countries. But I had a common concept that I wanted to pursue, and I called it the Second World. I said, if the first world is the rich countries, members of the OECD, that's 30 countries. The poor countries, or the poorest countries, they call them the least developed countries. That's 48 or 50 countries. 30 plus 50 is 80. But there's 200 countries in the world. What about everyone in between? So I started to say that's the second world. Now, people here will know the term second world used to mean the communist countries, the socialist countries. But no one used the term anymore from the 1990s onward. So I said, let's revive the concept, because we do have a world where inequality is widening within countries.
Yes.
And the second world countries, to me, are the ones that appear to be first world and third world at the same time. And you don't know which way they will go. And that describes dozens and dozens. Over 100 countries, I feel, are in what you would call limbo, not knowing their future. So I wanted to trace these countries. So I traveled and traveled. But the other common narrative was the geopolitical one. What happens to these countries in a world that is not dominated by America? In a world where there are multiple superpowers and empires. America, yes, still. But also the European Union is a bigger economy than the United States, 27 countries. And of course, China. And so I put those two things together in my travels. And so the book was called The Second World, and it was published in 2008.
Параг Ханна 1977 онд төрсэн энэтхэг гаралтай Америк нэгдсэн улсын дэлхийн засаглалын санаачлагын захирал. Шинэ Америк сангийн Америкийн стратегийн хөтөлбөрийн ахлах судлаач Параг Ханна. Параг Ханна нь олон улсын харилцааны судлаач бөгөөд дэлхийн геополитикийн асуудлаар олон бүтээл төрөвсөн. Түүний 2008 онд хэвлэгдсэн 2 дахь ертөнц ном бестселлер болж, эсвэр сэтгүүл түүнийг 21-р зууны хамгийн нөлөө бүхий 75 хүний нэгээр зарлаж байсан бол, Wire сэтгүүл дэлхийн ухаантай 15 хүний нэг хэмээсэн юм. Нэгдсэн үндэсний байгууллагын Ирак, Афганистан дахь тусгай салбарын геополитикийн зөвлөх байсан тэрээр Америк нэгдсэн улсын ерөнхийлөгчийн сонгуулийн үеэр Барак Обамагийн гадаад бодлогын багт нь ажиллаж байжээ.
In that book, you said you have created new term, geopolitical marketplace.
Yes.
Why?
It's an essential concept. When people think of geopolitics, they think of hegemony. They think of one power dominating.
We used to have it.
We used to
all
have
the time.
Yeah.
In history, we always have some hegemon.
Right. But now, what if you have a marketplace?
Yes.
What if you have 3 great powers that are stable and durable? Then you have a market. And then the second world countries and everyone can decide. Do I want to have weapons from one, trade with another, aid from another, exports here, investment from there, cultural relations here? This is the marketplace.
Okay, then this geopolitical tectonics you were describing in your book, everything, these major changes are markets driven?
Jargal сайхан нь 1984 онд Москвагийн улсын их сургуулийн эдийн засгийн ангийг онц төгсөж, эдийн засагч, улс төр, эдийн засгийн ухааны багшийн диплом авсан. 2002 онд Америк нэгдсэн улсад Денверийн их сургуульд бизнесийн удирдлагын магистрийн зэрэг хамгаалсан. Жаргал сайхан эдийн засагч, банк санхүү болон хөрөнгийн зах зээлийн мэргэжилтэн. Компани, банк санхүүгийн байгууллагуудад менежмент, түүний дотор стратегийн төлөвлөлт болон өрсөлдөх чадварын зөвлөхөөр ажилладаг. Монголын анхны клуб Улаанбаатар Ротари клубыг үндэслэн байгуулагч. 1995-аас 96 оны ерөнхийлөгч. 2003-аас 2007 онд Нээлттэй нийгмийн форумын төлөөлөн удирдах зөвлөлийн гишүүн. 2008-аас 2009 онд Монголын иргэний холбооны ерөнхийлөгч. Номхон далайн эдийн засгийн хамтын ажиллагааны Монголын үндэсний хорооны ерөнхий нарийн бичгийн дарга. Монголчууд шудрах татвар ухаалаг зардлын төлөө төрийн бус байгууллагын ерөнхийлөгч зэрэг иргэний нийгмийн ажил эрхэлдэг.
Well, the market concept is just about choice. The fact that you have a choice.
Yes.
It's not about with America or not with America.
Yeah.
It's about a choice. You can be with America, you can be with Europe, you can be with China, all at the same time. And the smartest countries are the ones that are with all at the same time. And they practice what I call multi-alignment. You don't align with one, you don't align with the other, you multiple align.
And this concept of multi-alignment, I think I would like to touch it a little bit later, but there's very interesting questions in the context of what you said about our region. In your presentation, and partially it was also in Mongolian, with Mongolian subtitle.
Right.
Mongolians know about your famous word called Mongolia.
Yes.
And you said in that presentation that 10 to 20 years from now, China is buying completely Mongolia. And China is also leasing Russia in an economic sense. So could you give more details about that and why you are saying that?
So the broader context is what I described in the Second World. The idea that when you have an empire, you do not treat it as a bordered state. Its influence spreads far beyond. It radiates, it integrates everything around it. And that the history of Asia is not the history of sovereign nation states with clear borders.
Yes.
It is a history of core empires and peripheral territories. It is a history of a central heart and a tributary system. Japan dominated the system. China has dominated the system.
Mongolians have dominated.
Mongolians have dominated the system before the others.
Yes.
And so my point is we are returning to that. And you remember during World War II, Japan's ambition was to have a greater Japanese co-prosperity, greater East Asian co-prosperity sphere, dominated by Japan.
Now that's why we had the war.
Right. I am saying that today there is a greater Chinese co-prosperity sphere emerging. There is a triangle. To me, the strategic Asian triangle is Japan, India, Australia. China is in the center of that.
Okay.
And the relationships that China is building is a reconstruction of that model, that historical Asian model. So that is the broader context. So I think Mongolians should see that they are one piece of that. So when I say things about Mongolia, it's not Mongolia-centric. This is a global, regional phenomenon. Remember that the Asian region is the most populous in the world. To step back for 1 minute, when people say, can China rival the United States in the world? I say it doesn't matter. Asia is the world, or Asia is a world unto itself. Asia has most of the world's people.
Nevertheless, you said that many people today, where they are living, will not live in that territory in 10, 20 years.
That's right.
And then it is touching interests of many people today in this or that way. And do you think it is exactly happening, or if there is any way that, I mean, obviously a country wants to be a bot. Okay, I understand what you said in that sense. So what is the best way not to be bought?
We should talk about this buying and leasing.
Yes.
Because it's so important to realize that this is in many ways a post-sovereign world.
Yes.
Even the realists acknowledge this. They appreciate that economic transactions and commercial influence play a major role in geopolitics today. So I said, colonies used to be conquered, today countries are bought.
Bought.
And that is a blunt fact. And I say this in my analysis of much of what is happening in the world. It is not just China and Mongolia. This is a global shift towards the influence of economics. So that's the first point. And that is what allows you to appreciate the softness of borders, whether it is migration of Chinese people outward, which is a major trend in the region. Look at Southeast Asia, 50 million Chinese.
Well, in the context of small country with few population like Mongolia,
Right.
2.5 million,
Right.
then having neighbors such a big like Russia and China in particular,
Right.
then this sounds rather
Ominous.
yes, that sounds not good. So, what is the way to avoid it, if possible?
Well, be careful, I think, what does one want to avoid? One wants to avoid being bought and owned, but Mongolia's economic growth, Mongolia's prosperity, the good things that have happened in Mongolia since the 1990s, a lot of that has to do with exporting to China.
True.
That is important.
Yes, this is
There is no such thing as being completely separate, divorced from
Well,
China.
that's the difference of understanding I would like to a little bit develop. And probably a country like Mongolia is to look outward.
Yes.
That's the only way.
Yes.
And when we look at outward world, we have the largest market, which is
Right.
keeps buying everything what we export.
So maybe it is a good thing if it is managed well, and that is the question.
Yes.
People should not, when I say Mongolia,
Yes.
people should not, in Mongolia, people should not react and say, that is horrible fate. That's not true. First of all, there are 50 or 60 or 70 countries in the world that would beg to be called Mongolia, because it is a brand, and it is a true statement that Mongolia has vast natural resources
Where did you take it from?
to offer to the world.
The term.
I don't know.
Does it sound in English in that way?
No, yes. It Mongolia, and then you just have
Mongolia.
Yeah, but I did not invent it.
Okay.
But now I get the credit.
Okay, very interesting combination of two words.
But there are many countries that would
Would
love
be.
to have that branding and to have the real resources. And this
And
is the
in fact,
question.
we are. I think the large pie of exploration budget in the world
Yes,
was spent in Mongolia.
that's right.
And it's one of the attributes why Mongolia is Mongolia as well.
Right.
Well, we have so many mineral wealth, and the market is next door.
Right.
So that's what is going on in this country.
And so
only the
Mongolia
issue
is lucky.
Yeah, but
Right.
now the issue is how much and how well we are doing
Right.
with these proceeds from revenues from that mining
Yeah.
wealth. So in that terms, how do you see something wrong, or how much you recognize that factor?
Yeah, that's very, very important. But I want to say that people talk about the resource curse. They say it's a dangerous thing if poor countries discover substantial mineral wealth, extractive sector, oil, gas, so forth. It leads to all kinds of problems, rent-seeking behavior, Dutch disease, resource dependency, all sorts of corruption, of course, and ultimately civil war and collapse. There's been a lot of research that says that poor countries that acquire these resources wind up worse off. That is not true. It's no longer true. Because if you look at the Persian Gulf countries today,
Yes.
who does not want to be like them, right? If you look at Malaysia, for example, very admirable. Look at Kazakhstan nearby. So it is not true that the resource curse is universal, and it is not true that Muslim countries cannot prosper and develop with oil. These things are false. There is not a resource curse. It is an opportunity.
Can a country like Mongolia be prosperous with this, and what are required for that?
Yes. There are a lot of ingredients. The good news is that because I cited all of these examples,
Yes.
there is a current history, which sounds like an oxymoron, but
Yes.
I mean there is contemporary evidence
Yes.
and success stories and lessons to learn. The way in which futures funds are set up
Yes.
to take the revenues and allocate to the people.
Yes.
The Alaska model, some
Yes.
people say. And people have said that should be used for Iraq. So that's one ingredient, of course. Another is the reinvestment.
Now we call it Human Development Fund in
Human
Mongolia
Development
so
Fund,
far. Yes,
right.
the Futures Fund.
And another is the reinvestment in infrastructure, the capital investment in infrastructure of the country to spread
It's one of the
access.
ingredients which must.
Yes.
We talk about infrastructure, solid infrastructure that touches every home possibly, or every place where many people live.
Absolutely. And it is a fact that today the countries that have the highest percentage of their GDP invested in infrastructure are growing the fastest. So China and Vietnam and others that are investing in roads, railways, and pipelines and electricity grids. Very important to reach the people, to spread the wealth. So that's another ingredient.
To reach every part of the country, regions that where people can have access to necessary elementary things, where they can run their business.
And this is why we speak about a Chile model for Mongolia. Because look at what Chile has done. Very vast country, very dispersed population, very rugged terrain,
long
and of course lots of copper.
Yes.
And
very
small
similar.
population, 5 million people. But they have very good pension system, very good literacy, very high literacy, very good infrastructure, and they're even diversifying the economy. Wine, information technology, fisheries, tourism. So there is a very good model. Chile is a role model for all of Latin America. It's also a role model for
Mongolia as well. That's what we see. So the second is infrastructure, public investment into infrastructure. What is the other ingredients you think? How about education? How about the sort of things where the return comes very late.
Yes, but that is why one is saving the money and spending it in a strategic way, so that also, of course, you want to avoid inflation, for example. So this
in this country now, our ruling parties give cash to people. Obviously, it is not the best way. We always see whenever they give you cash, we see inflation.
There's a lot of countries, though, such as Brazil, where cash transfers are being done, but in a limited volume, and they are earmarked. So the spending should be on food. The spending should be on education. These are the essential things.
How would you control that? What for they are spending?
Well, they're given vouchers, for example. So in Brazil,
they do
cash
vouchers.
Cash
which is the cash voucher to be used for particular
things.
They
are earmarked, yes, absolutely. And then gradually there is research that shows that you train, you condition, you wean people towards making those same decisions themselves. And in Brazil, that is also happening. And countries are copying that model.
Can you elaborate a bit about, now we have talked about the public policy, where to invest, obviously we also will include good public governance, no corruption, transparency.
Extractive industries, transparency initiative. Mongolia is a member of this.
And I think government is one on the board of that initiative. And more or less, for the last 2-3 years, we are learning how much the mining companies pay. On one side, and they are reporting themselves how much they paid. On the other side, the tax authorities are also declaring, and we try to match.
The original name for EITI is Publish What You Pay. And it was created by George Soros, by the way.
By the way, George Soros is very active in Mongolia. I served on his board as well here. And I think it is one of the philanthropists who made a substantial difference in this country in terms of democracy, human rights, and we are very much thankful to him for that. And it's we are part of the CIT. So public governance, these are the ingredients what we need. Now let's talk a little bit about this multi-alignment. You have been mentioning about Libya, where certain criteria is applied. 1/3. Could you elaborate a bit about that?
Yeah, I call it the rule of 1/3.
Okay.
The rule of 1/3 states that, again, a smart second world country with natural resources would allocate production sharing agreements. 1/3 to North America, Canada, USA. 1/3 to Europe. 1/3 to Asia. And Asia usually means a combination of China and Malaysia and India, maybe. So Libya does this. And what you find in this rule of 1/3, it applies to Africa. The United States and Europe used to dominate foreign investment. Europe would dominate imports from Africa. Today you find that China has an equal rank almost with the US and Europe in terms of foreign investment into Africa, and exports from Africa are now going in a more balanced share in all directions.
In Mongolia, almost 70% alone by China.
Yes,
is happening.
Very different situation.
Very interesting. You said the multi-alignment in economic terms. We have coined also a policy, also known as a third neighbor policy, and we call all major powers, including U.S., Japan, Germany, other European countries, as a third neighbors, because we have two neighbors. So the third policy, I mean, it's more in political terms it goes. I wish it goes in more in economic terms within these parameters you said about Libya. Well, Libya is 5.6 million people.
Yes, that's right.
And they are prosperous, right?
Well, they have some issues. They have some of the same issues that Mongolia has, actually.
Let's then talk about Kazakhstan a little bit.
Right.
To us, where we have more or less political democracy, Kazakhstan, we find it is more or less under one person ruling, etc. But nevertheless, the people are getting prosperous, and will the people? How do they live now? I think they're living better, and they are not much against ruling of one guy.
Remember that Kazakhstan is even larger than Mongolia.
Yes,
and,
very large.
And this is where the issue of democracy comes up versus good governance. And what Nazarbayev is providing, by most people's accounts, is more or less decent governance. There are human rights problems. There is corruption, without a doubt. It is a more or less authoritarian, oligopolistic system. But he, at the same time, admires Lee Kuan Yew. You know, if you talk to him. Everyone admires
Lee Kuan Yew is advisor to Nazarbayev almost from the beginning.
See? He is, exactly.
And I think he's doing successfully what Lee Kuan Yew made in Singapore.
I think the key
Succession
thing is,
you know,
people want results, though. And the thing is, he's delivering these results. So whether or not he is a democratic leader is, for many people, less important. And that's why you're saying that people more or less go along.
Well, I like this one. I mean, whatever is there, but if the result is there, the people don't mind.
Yeah.
Well, initially. But to a certain level, that everybody has a food, roof, and that's what is missing substantially here. And that's why we are looking for a better pattern or better structure of governance and economy, and we keep going here and there, but we have not yet found. And the major reason is we don't have results.
Multi-party democracy, like Mongolia or like India, can be very inefficient. I am Indian by birth. I am very known in India as a critic of the inefficiency of Indian democracy. The very poor, and it's unforgivable.
The same as the Filipinos.
Yes. So if you look at Asia, what are the fast-growing countries that people are admiring? Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam,
Bhutan,
China. These are the non-democracies.
Yes.
Now let's look at the ones where there's a political crisis every week. Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, democracies. So in Asia, if I were living in Asia, why would I admire or want to copy the democracies? Where is the evidence that they are producing either the economic growth and delivery, or even the political stability, because democracies are supposed to be more politically stable?
What do you suggest? In this country, we up to now believe strongly democracy is something where human rights is protected, you are assured, you can express yourself.
Absolutely.
And then it doesn't work. I mean, if there is any way to get it works and to get the economy works, if there is any way, what do you think?
If the reason that there are still poor people in Mongolia, disenfranchised people in Mongolia, disconnected people in Mongolia, is not because the country has human rights and a free media. Those are good things. But it's because there isn't one policy consensus, and yet there should be, because as we said earlier, you have the Chile model, you have the Kazakhstan model.
So what should we do to have the same program?
To have the policy consensus?
Yes, so whoever comes to just implement the things. Not like in our country, it's like a drunk driver,
Right.
One party goes here, the other party goes there. And by the way, in that process, we even lose the government institutions.
Yeah.
There is not institution capacity.
It's more about individuals, yeah.
Well, more than that, when whoever is winning at the election, they wipe out everybody there at the department level. That each ministry brings their own people. As a result, there is no institution which is to deliver the result.
Right. Two things can be done. One, voters have to be aware of this. They have to be aware that there is a set of policies that work, and that's why in Brazil and in Chile and in other countries you find that it doesn't matter which party wins because there is a good policy.
So education or knowledge of voters.
Yeah. And another is strengthening the institutions. So what some foreign aid donors do is not focus just on the democratic, the parties and the elections. They focus on building the ministries and building their capacity and the bureaucracies that implement good policies. So that way, it's harder to push them around.
Yes.
Right?
Well, then it requires a very transparent operation of each institution, probably decent salary for each bureaucrat.
Absolutely.
But then it requires also productivity. For decent salary, one is to have a great productivity, which is not the case. So we are sort of a virtuous circle, One comes, the other misses.
Well, Mongolia is, hopefully still, to my mind, to many others' minds, is still 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Not 1 step forward, 2 steps back. So, as I say, many countries would want to be like Mongolia, in the position that Mongolia is in today.
Yeah, I'm not talking about the positive things we have already, because we talk a lot about anyway.
Yeah.
I'd like to see today with you, what is the new ideas contribution towards what we are doing? Can we talk a little bit about, you have visited during 2 years 40 countries and studied, obviously. And Mongolia has a very interesting, also difficult, in a way, situation where half of the population is almost living in this small town, Ulaanbaatar. Yeah. And the Ulaanbaatar officials, the way how the city is run is very bad. And they cut, one bridge there, one bridge here, no planning, and then suddenly they say, oh, it is broken, we have to stop, and they have creating this traffic jam we just now saw, etc. And they are speculating the land and, all this. We have big problem with the city. And yet we cannot elect our city mayor because it's nominated by these political parties. Right. Can you compare this similar situation with where the cities where the mayors are nominated?
Right. This is a very common phenomenon around the world. The truth is that, and this was one of the central arguments I made in Second World, is that you see the division within the society, the first world part and the third world part, because you have to visit the city and the countryside. Now you have Louis Vuitton, you have Dior in Ulaanbaatar. You do not have that in the Gare villages in the Gobi. Mongolia is based on your per capita GDP, Mongolia is very much a second world country, very much so.
Yes.
But the phenomenon of the centrality of the main city and the impact that has on national politics is a worldwide thing. Even in the first world, what was Jacques Chirac before he became president of the French Republic? He was mayor of Paris. Ahmadinejad in Iran. Mayor of Tehran. Right. But now let's talk about how Saakashvili in Georgia, Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, they control the mayorship of Caracas, of Tbilisi. They decide who is the mayor. The mayor can never oppose them because that's the next best job. So the issue of who manages the capital is
a political motivation,
very politically driven issue, and it always will be. We have to accept that here in Ulaanbaatar, here in Mongolia, that is always going to be a very, very central and sensitive topic.
So, do you think it is good to have a mayor selected by citizens, or?
Urban residents in the capital are more educated, they're very aware of the issues, they can be very sensitive and fickle. They can really see whether or not the services being provided and the policies in the city are good or not, and they can react quickly. It's very difficult to get the reaction about the city phenomenon from everywhere else in the country. But the residents should be allowed to elect the mayor, in fact, more frequently, in a way, so that they can really have a voice in what is being decided, and whether it is working or not working.
It is still a dream for Ulaanbaatar citizens to have our mayor elected, so that we can have him held responsible
and
accountable for what we have. We have a terrible winter. I think it is one of the dirtiest air polluted city in the world, mainly because half of the city's population is living around the city in these Gir areas, and they are burning coal. Half-burned coal makes terrible air.
Yeah. So if you go to places like Kathmandu in Nepal, mountainous capital cities that are in valleys and have the surrounding, and you have the coal burning, and you have a lot of scooters and cars, and you have traffic congestion, that always leads to bad air. Caracas is the same. So we know many cities, or Kabul is famously unbreathable air. New Delhi used to be very bad like this. What you can do with policy, and this is what you should measure the mayor on, does he implement buses that run on CNG, clean natural gas? They did it in New Delhi. One judge said all buses will run on CNG. The quality of air in Delhi, which by the way has 15 times more people than Ulaanbaatar, is cleaner today than it was years ago. You can judge the mayor on that. Did he do that?
Oh, we wish we'd do that.
Right. but
as our mayor, as our Mongolian politicians, they promise good things all the time. And then the same thing is happening, The Russians proverb is saying that I want the best. Right. But the result was as usual, Right. That's what we have with our public governance, in particular with the city. Yeah. And we don't know what to do yet. So we see maybe one of the solution is to be elected mayor, hold him accountable, particularly by these indexes as you suggested.
The same applies really nationally. I mean, you have elections, of course, for the national leadership.
Yes.
And the same metrics would apply. But it needs to be in the consciousness of the voters.
Speaking about that elections, unfortunately, our political parties, two ruling parties, which is now in coalition, they each of them promises before election cash, 1,000, the others 1,500 in dollar terms. And they are competing with their promises. As a result, they're sort of buying, voting.
Yeah. This is another global phenomenon, and I'll tell you that it happens even in countries with higher incomes, like Lebanon, or which is the only real Arab democracy, nominal Arab democracy. It happens even in the world's largest democracy, in India. There's an emerging body of work that studies Indian democracy, and it's called Elections as Auctions, right? Which is vote buying. And in most Indian villages, in most Indian areas, the election is an auction. Exactly what you described, promises of money to get elected.
If there's any way to stop that way,
it's evolution. I mean, one does not...
You think it will still keep going?
In India, of course. India is much poorer, right? Yeah. But it happens in wealthier countries like Lebanon, it happens in poorer countries like India. In India, I see no way for it to change other than through the evolution, success and failure, learning, trial and error. But there are things that will happen. So as roads are built, people will leave badly governed places, right? There is an exodus out of some of the worst parts of India. People have just left. And then, when the government gets better, people come back. Bihar is the most famous Indian basket case. The poorest, most badly run, most corrupt and dangerous part of India. Today, people talk about Bihar.com. The government has changed.
So the city is changed too?
Efficient railways, better airport,
so
more trade.
Better infrastructure, better investment into the way people live.
They're inviting in investment to rebuild the great Buddhist university of Nalanda, which is outside of Patna, the capital. So initiatives like this are putting it back on the map and waking people up. And that was the worst part of India. So it's possible. It's possible.
Let's talk a bit about the future of Mongolia. How do you see? We don't export anything other than mining, copper, gold, coal Do you think Mongolian can produce something that we can export if there is a particular niche as you see, or I think it is hopeless? What do you think?
No, it's not hopeless. But there are two kinds of countries in the world, landlocked and not landlocked.
Yes.
And Mongolia is landlocked. I've looked at landlocked places, like Nepal, Afghanistan, Kurdistan, not yet a country, but basically becoming one.
Yes.
And they face a special set of problems.
Yes.
But the solution is always to open, not to close. But that means, of course, then the rail infrastructure, the roads, the export direction to both neighbors, but also to the third neighbors.
No,
right?
Speaking about railroad, we have recently, the government made decisions to make every railroad in this country on a Russian standard, as it is today. And they will continue to build the Russian gauge, with China,
Right.
it's 85 millimeter difference. Do you recall any analog where the country, a sort of a melting point or meeting point of two different standards? Is it, what is the best, to accept one standard of one neighbor, or a standard to accept both of them and get met in your territory?
Well, the only good example of a switch is the European Union. Because as the Eastern European countries join the Union, when I used to travel from Germany east, the train would have to stop, the gauge would switch. It's very inefficient. Now it's all on the European system. So you have the French trains and the German trains. They can keep going non-stop through the whole EU. Harmonized to...
Technically, how they have solved it? Because one is wider a little bit.
Right. Huge infrastructure investment.
The EU, so that both train can go on two sides, no?
No. They replace wholesale. The European Union is the biggest spender in the world. When people say the Pentagon, look at the American defense budget, I always say that the European Commission is the Pentagon of Europe.
So they have an investment. They have money for that.
It spends way more than the Pentagon does, but for good things. It upgrades the infrastructure to the most widely used standard. What is happening now, and this is fascinating, this is why I talk about the new Silk Road, because eventually China has already brought together a consortia of about 35 governments to discuss the harmonization of the standards so that trains can pass without switching, unobstructed. Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, and Korea as well, and including Russia, Mongolia, Central Asian countries, the Stan countries, harmonize. There's a lot of money that needs to go into it. China is interested, Korea is interested, and so hopefully there can be a smoother passage. And Mongolia would sit at a very crucial point in that. It already does.
No, I thought that exactly that's why, because this advantageous position, it's the only chance for Mongolia to have both railroads and to get connected in Mongolia, where whatever they're switching things happening in this country.
So it will be a long time before there is the perfect
Probably down the road it will come.
In the meantime, Mongolia is very well placed to be that junction point, right? And that's the way Mongolia should see itself, is that junction point.
Well, now let's talk a bit about what brought you to Mongolia today, and what is that mission about. Please brief us about what you have done. I know tomorrow you're going to hand over the ambulance you were with your friends driving all the way from London. Tell us about the project a little bit.
There is a charity called Go Help, and Go Help every year organizes a rally in which people drive useful vehicles, ambulances, trucks, things that Mongolians can use. Drive from London to Ulaanbaatar. So it's about 11,000 kilometers. And people get sponsorship however they can. And we were very generously sponsored by Renaissance Capital. And we have friends here in Mongolia at Kas Bank, and they've been very, very helpful. And people take routes through Central Asia, through Turkey, Iran. We came across Russia.
Which you did after how many days?
It took 30 days.
30 days driving a car.
It's a Land Rover. A Land Rover was also very generous to us with their help for supplies and equipment along the way to repair the vehicle. It is here. Tomorrow we will be donating it formally to the Go Help charity, and they will provide it for usage for Mongolian hospitals, especially the emergency services that reach well out into the country, into the the disparate areas. So that is what brought me here. In fact, there are 4 ambulances that have come on this one journey.
That's a wonderful project, and
It
it's
is.
a part of what you do.
It is.
And I'm very much impressed with that. You had also spent your whole month. You're obviously writing now another book.
Yes, that's right.
What is the name of the book?
The book has a title that you will not forget. It is titled How to Run the World.
Okay.
It is titled that because it's about diplomacy.
Okay.
And I was thinking I wanted to write a book about diplomacy because my PhD is on the topic of diplomatic history and the evolution of the systems of diplomacy. The whole world today is in one diplomatic system. Every country is connected. Corporations
Where the
are
people
connected.
play the most important role, probably.
And people's groups also.
Yes.
And so I wanted to talk about diplomacy in the 21st century. And diplomacy is, in fact, the method that we use to try and make rules for the world. So I'm writing, that is the book, actually.
Okay.
And it will be published next year.
Diplomacy. You have been advising President Obama, and what you have been saying during the political campaign, and what is he doing today, in particular with the this morning's statement about taking out soldiers from Iraq.
When I was in the campaign, I was in the advisory group looking at Central Asia and South Asia, Afghanistan, Pakistan,
Okay.
India. One of the major issues of the campaign. In terms of foreign policy, there were several major platforms. One was to focus on Afghanistan and Pakistan, which we are obviously doing. And before that campaign, I worked in Afghanistan for General McChrystal, who is the head of NATO forces.
Yes.
He is now stepped down. But I work very, very closely with him. I do believe we are engaging more with Pakistan and with Afghanistan. But I cannot say that it's going very well.
Do you know that there are some peacekeepers from Mongolia
Yes, of course.
serving in these countries,
I do.
and not only, and also in Africa?
That's right.
It's a gesture of a smaller country where people want to be a part of this peacemaking.
There's also a third neighbor element to it, because the United States and Mongolian militaries have a very good relationship. And the Mongolian military officers and troops that I have met in various places and here really represent a good, strong professionalism. And I spend a lot of time in countries where I do not see that level and that standard, such as Pakistan and Afghanistan. So I think Mongolia deserves a lot of praise for that. And the other major pillar of Obama's campaign platform was the pulling out from Iraq, and that is clearly underway. But on the whole, to be perfectly honest, I'm very disappointed in the lack of progress overall on a number of issues over the last 1.5 years. It's not Obama's fault, but we have to be very honest with ourselves that the relationship with Iran there's not been any breakthrough, and the offers that were promised have not really been fulfilled. I worry that there is really not a coherent strategy towards the Middle East, Israel, Palestine, that was talked about, but nothing new. I'm very disappointed, actually, in that.
So what are you going to do?
Well, I don't formally work for the government, at the moment.
You work for a foundation called
Yes.
New America
The
Foundation.
New America Foundation is a relatively new think tank in Washington, one of the most prominent ones today. And it is very privately funded, just like the other best think tanks take no government
What is
money.
your position in terms of other think tanks? Many of them are in Washington.
Yeah.
How you would describe your mission of that strong think tank?
Well, New America Foundation has a very clever motto. They say they are the radical center. They want to create a consensus around radical, positive, and progressive change for the next generation of Americans and for the future of America, but also on global issues. So that was very attractive to me. So I joined them from the Brookings Institution, which is a much older
Yes.
but more conservative think tank. So New America Foundation has built a very strong reputation on that motto over the last decade.
Well, I think your foundation will help you to do the job you are doing, making the world to understanding each other better, and the places like Mongolia to do much better than they are now. So thank you very much for your generous remarks you made tonight, and thank you for bringing this ambulance for Mongolians, and it will probably save many lives in this country.
I hope so.
And
thank you so much.
It's for our future, and thank you so much for the wonderful interview.
Thank you.
Thank you.